A new Stockholm will have to be built in the next 6 years, according to a new report released by the National Board of Housing, Building and Planning in Sweden. Bengt Eriksson, an analyst from the Building and Planning Department, speaking to Swedish radio SR, said that to be able to house the hundreds of thousands of immigrants that are heading to Sweden, a total of 600,000 new dwellings will have to be built in only 11 years.
Som vi skriver i rapporten så handlar det om volymer som vi inte har varit i närheten av sen i stort sett sedan miljonprogrammets dagar.
It's levels that we've not been close to since the Million Program, he said. The Million Program, by the way, was a central planning approach, a public housing program implemented between 1965 and 74 by the ruling Social Democratic Party. It's one of the ugliest Swedish architectural achievements of all time. A lot of beautiful old wooden buildings in cities like Gothenburg were leveled to give space to these horrid concrete shoeboxes stacked on top of each other. So we have now entered a new era of public housing program, the new projects to look forward to in Sweden. In Stockholm municipality today, there are about 430,000 dwellings. This means, to accommodate the wave of immigration, a whole new Stockholm will have to be built. Stockholm is a city that has grown and expanded over an 800-year period, so it's not a matter of building a new and aesthetically beautiful Stockholm like we've seen in the past, but the bare bones, 4 walls, a door and a window. To be able to cope with this project, major sacrifices by the taxpayer will have to be made, said the government office. It means a complete readjustment of our entire industry. It also will have effects on the infrastructure, as services, communication, etc. will be needed, said Mr. Eriksson when he spoke to Swedish radio. According to calculations by Dagens Samhälle, a leading public market paper, there will be 600,000 asylum seekers and relatives sponsored by the immigrants already here during the coming term of office. That's about 120,000 people a year. A number of desperate measures have now been suggested to be able to deal with this emergency situation. Last year, we saw old historic castles and manor houses being turned into asylum-seeking facilities for immigrants. Today, we are seeing suggestions from our Minister of Housing, Mehmet Kaplan, a Muslim, that we need to build modular houses, which would include a temporary building permit. This option, however, was investigated by JM and other major construction companies, and their conclusion was that this would be more expensive since the houses also would have to be dismantled after the temporary period was up, and the payment would still remain even after that point. Rent would be an estimated 20,000 Swedish crowns a month. That's about $2,400 per modular unit. The National Board of Housing has now therefore proposed a more radical plan. Everything that can be converted into housing to be able to house the new Swedes, the replacement population that is arriving in Sweden, should be converted into housing. This includes government buildings, forest and agricultural facilities, churches and other religious buildings, and also municipal buildings that today functions to organize and operate the very Swedish government that has failed to deal with the situation they are now creating. Any facility or premise that are deemed by the agency that are for the most part empty can be converted into immigrant housing. That is the reasoning by the government office releasing this report. One of the larger government-subsidized evening papers, the left liberal Expressen, on their editorial suggested, for example, that the St. Paulskyrkan, the St. Paul's Church on Södermalm in Stockholm, is to be demolished to give way to asylum facilities. We should tear down more churches in Sweden, says the headline. Remember, this comes at a time when more mosques are being built in Sweden, and also call to prayer in Fittja, a Stockholm suburb, has been ongoing since 2013. Already, we've seen small business owners who run camping grounds and rent cabins become very wealthy due to the immigrant industry, as it's deemed in Sweden now.
Lennart Erki driver en flyktingförläggning i Boden. Förra året fakturerade han 14 miljoner kronor till Migrationsverket.
Det är klart det är en bra affär att ha dem här. Absolut, det är kontinuerligt boende.
Jim Hoppe driver 4 flyktingförläggningar och förra året fakturerade han och hans bolag 56 miljoner kronor.
Vad är skälet till att du gick in i detta att tjäna pengar? Svar ja.
Hotels, hostels, rentals, trailers, anything they can has and will be picked up by the government to be utilized for immigrants. The taxpayer picks up the bill. In the report from the National Board of Housing, Building and Planning by the most equality-obsessed country in the world, they suggest special treatment for immigrants. There is a tremendous shortage of apartments and houses in Sweden currently. Most are based on housing lists, and the waiting time can be very, very long. So the report have suggested that every municipality adopts a priority system. Immigrants who are arriving in Sweden shall get priority above the Swedes in the housing lists. The Housing Division suggests that municipalities that refuse to divide up those who are looking for housing in an A team and a B team based on their origin should be forced to do so with a new law. There is no mention in the report about what measures shall be adopted for the Swedish young adults that want to leave home and start their own life and family who are also suffering from this housing shortage.
Men bostadsbristen är kännbar för långt fler än de nyanlända. Tusentals unga har små förhoppningar om att hitta något eget. Som 24-åriga Julia som med en lön på 10 000 efter skatt varken har råd med bostadsrätt eller nybyggda hyreslägenheter.
Det känns väl inte så hoppfullt liksom. Det är svårt att se en framtid här i Stockholm när jag inte vet vart jag ska bo eller hur jag kan bo. Få bo hos vänner och...
Swedes in the Stockholm area might wait for as long as 8.6 years before they can get an apartment. But newly arrived immigrants can, and some have, received an apartment in 2 to 4 weeks. Immigrants today already have priority on social housing, so the, for example, poor Swedes is already discriminated against, and it's deemed more important that the immigrant get access than a Swede. It's a system that makes, quote, other weaker social groups that in many cases have been waiting in the housing queue for years to get overlooked, notes Boverket in their recent report. There have been other indications and rumors that suggests that the summer cabins and holiday dwellings that the Swedes own are to be confiscated by the government for the greater good so that we will be able to house all the immigrants that are now getting ready for their new life in Sweden. Commenting on the housing shortage and land availability in Sweden, the former Prime Minister Fredrik Reinfeldt from our left-wing conservative party, the Moderates, said before the September election last year in an interview with the Danish paper Politiken that there are plenty of room in Sweden and the Nordic countries for immigrants. He said, quote, "What does the word enough mean? Sweden is full, the Nordic region is full. Are we too many people? We are 25 million people living in the north. I often fly over the Swedish countryside, and I would advise others to do so. There are endless fields and forests. There's more space than you might imagine. Those who claim that the country is full, they should demonstrate where it is full." Unquote. So never mind the housing shortage, the infrastructure question, the economic problems, the unemployment levels, the cultural conflicts, the ethnic displacement of the Swedish people, the Norwegian people, the Danes, the Finns, and the Icelanders. These are minorities in the world. By this reasoning, we can or should open the doors to the entire world if they so see fit to come to Sweden to get an apartment and get support by the Swedish taxpayer.
Jag kommer nu vädja till svenska folket idag att öppna sina hjärtan.
Open your hearts was the slogan that Fredrik Reinfeldt pushed in the last election, pleading with the Swedish people to let unmitigated third world immigration come into Sweden. If you think this wasn't enough, he topped himself shortly afterwards by saying that Sweden belongs to the immigrant who has moved here, not the native Swedish people.
det är ett vägval om vilket land Sverige ska vara. Är det här ett land som ägs av de som har bott här i 3 eller 4 generationer? Eller är Sverige vad människor som kommer hit mitt i livet gör det till att vara och utvecklar det till? Och för mig är det självklart att det ska vara det senare.
He made the historic omission by not recognizing that the Swedish people have thousands of years of history tied to this particular land by saying that the land is not owned by those who have lived here for 3 or 4 generations. That's a very short time. In the past, he's been saying that Sweden's border are fictional and that native Swedish people are, quote, uninteresting, unquote. In fact, this particular stance seems to be shared across the party lines. If you ask the former leader of the current party in power, the Social Democrats, she said that it's clear that white Swedish people are the problem.
Det är den vita normen som dominerar i Socialdemokraternas viktigaste maktinstanser. Det slås fast i den starkt kritiska SSU-rapporten 4 nyanser av vitt.
Vad bör Socialdemokraterna göra?
Titeln till rapporten säger vad man egentligen borde göra. Att inte se bristen på så kallat utländska svenskar i SSU och partiet som ett problem, utan att vi, den vita majoriteten, är så många. Och det är vi som måste förstå att vi är problemet och vi måste förändra vårt sätt att vara.
Sweden has the most extreme immigration policy in Europe, and immigration is just expected to increase in the next 10 years. Sweden, with its current rulership, is unable to say no, or unable to stop the destructive path that it currently is on. Sweden is continuing to embarrass itself internationally by going from a model nation to one that is plummeting in education, a crumbling healthcare system, privatization everywhere, steeped in suicidal hatred for its own people, imprisoning people for humorous art, silencing opposition, denouncing those who are rationally, logically, and reasonably about matters pertaining to immigration. If you touch this question in any other way than the established approach that is set by the mainstream editorial press, and that's usually open borders forever, that's the approach, you are branded as a racist, a Nazi. The political leadership have painted themselves into a corner, however, and they refuse to acknowledge that they have made mistakes when it comes to Sweden's extreme immigration policy. The ruthless consensus and conformity of opinion is as tyrannical as any in the former Soviet Union. It is an iron fist in a velvet glove. People are fired from their jobs, they're shunned in the media, they're ostracized and turned into pariahs in their own neighborhoods, and consequently disassociated by family members and friends due to this very, very important question about Sweden's future. The so-called debate about this issue is so infantile, it's on such a kindergarten level, it's turned into a sandbox of name-calling and derogatory terms. That's where it begins, and that's usually where it ends. The establishment in Sweden are as incapable as toddlers to face the reality that they have created for themselves. They are in such denial that even now, when the infrastructure is unable to deal with this problem, when it's now starting to collapse, they are refusing to see what is right in front of their eyes. We're now going to start to see the real consequences of their policies and their inability to think that Sweden, a country of about 8 million ethnic Swedes, this humanitarian superpower, can carry the rest of the world and her problems on its shoulders, on the Swedish people's shoulders.
Vi gör inte i vår tid något anspråk på att vara en militär supermakt. Men Sverige, mina vänner, är något av en humanitär stormakt.
We are a humanitarian superpower, and if it destroys the Swedish people in the process to prove it, so be it. In fact, it almost seems like they're bent on the destruction of the Swedish people. They will run over the people, toss them to the side, use them to extract the means to be able to give to others that have no historical anchoring to this country. The reality of the history of what has built a nation that is even in a position to help other nations in the way that we have is discounted as luck or as a fluke. It has nothing to do with those who came before us or what they did. For example, Sweden, a country of about now 9.6 million people, donated close to $2 billion to Africa in 2012 alone, without any demands for a return investment, like most other countries who invested in this way. You think that we could spend the money better here at home, now when there is a housing shortage, helping our poor and elderly, our sick and young, our children and their education, our healthcare system, our social security. No, they have to be sacrificed on the altar of idealism to the multicultural cult, any means necessary. The continuous touting, of course, of equal value or solidarity or humanitarianism is, judging by the actions of the political elite, seems only to apply one way. This means sidestepping those people who have enabled this egalitarian system to even be in existence. This engine is now being shut down. This engine is now being destroyed. Tino Sandan-Aji is a Kurd who came to Sweden from Iran, who clearly sees the writing on the wall. He's an economist, has a PhD from the University of Chicago. He's a research fellow at the Research Institute of Industrial Economics in Stockholm, and he has the following to say.
You don't have to be Nostradamus to predict the future. You go to cities like Malmö, Sweden's third city, that are 20 years ahead demographically. That's what the rest of Sweden is going to be, and Sweden is taking more immigrants, more refugees, than UK, France, and all the other Nordic countries combined. And at the same time, Sweden has, in the OECD, the largest gap in employment between natives and immigrants. It's literally the worst country in the world in terms of getting immigrants integrated into the labor market. The central problem of Sweden is that these facts are not openly discussed. The right, political right, the left, and the media, they have formed an iron cartel to basically censor negative facts about immigration and sort of highlight positive spin on this issue. And for a Swedish academic or a politician or a reporter to go on TV and say the figures I've reported, that could destroy their career. And at any case, they would cause a huge amount of social reprisal. And if the politicians and the media can claim that immigration is good for the economy, it's not causing unemployment, it's not causing social problems, then they easily win the debate, right? So then they cheat. Then they just create this basically public lie that things are going great, we have minor problems, but this is basically beneficial. So the sort of a spin has become a reality to them. And given that they believe that, when they hear somebody say these negative, pessimistic numbers, they assume it can't be true. Because if that were true, why isn't everybody saying it on TV? The social truth wins over the factual truth. But I would understand this if there was a plan. So okay, let's lie or white lies for a while until we solve this problem. The thing is, though, that the problem isn't solving itself. It's just slowly becoming bigger and bigger. And I have to say that the level of speech oppression that they have achieved, completely decentralized without any real laws or sort of, it's not Iran. They don't put you in prison if you say these numbers. What they do is you may get fired, or you may, half your friends are going to remove you on Facebook. It works. So academics are off that these facts are well known by economists, for example. But economists are generally silent. What benefit is it for you if you're a blonde, blue-eyed Swede to go and say, yeah, immigration is really bad for the economy? But then you are saying the same thing as those skinheads, right? So then maybe you're one of them. Maybe you're racist. Why else would you be saying that? I mean, even the New York Times had an article where they were shocked about the so-called consensus in Sweden, how there was a sort of wet blanket over the debate. Sweden is one of the most secular countries in the world. Okay, they've lost their moral grounding because and the elitists in particular are aggressively anti-religion, right? So, but people, of course, need some sort of spirituality, morality, some values. And instead, their values are anti-racism. So they created this alternative reality for themselves, where it's the 1930s, and they're the guys fighting Hitler. And if somebody says immigrants have high unemployment, some of them genuinely think, yeah, that's exactly what Hitler said. They don't know what Hitler said. They don't understand that. And that, if you want, you can perhaps find an explanation in the lack of values, and people fill it up then with something else. It's a quasi-religion, yes. It's a secular religion. In the short run, they are just going to continue, and we have the projections that the record levels that we have now are going to accelerate even further. In the long run, my guess is this is going to collapse.
When you say collapse, what comes to your mind? Economic collapse?
In Sweden?
Social unrest, yeah.
Adam Smith said there is a lot of ruin in a nation. By that he meant that nations can take a lot of beating without collapsing. Sweden will never collapse, okay? What's going to happen if this continues is just a gradual deterioration in social economic outcomes, more segregation.
So what is the mentality? Is it NIMBY, not in my backyard? The leaders of Sweden, we're going to bring all these immigrants in because it makes us feel better, but they won't be going to our kids' schools.
Yes. So among Swedish politicians, there was one of the Swedish newspapers had a survey. 1% of them live in the areas where there are lots of immigrants, and those are typically immigrants. I mean, that just that tells you something about those people, right? The elite, which is this is more multiculturalism for voters, but not for me and my kids. If you really think multiculturalism is good, why don't you go live there? The fact that you don't live there, that almost none of them live there, almost none of them send their kids to school there, shows that at a human level, at some level, they understand that this is not working. And these politicians, some of them know. I mean, I talk to, high-ranking politicians sometimes. Some of them know what's going on, and that this is unsustainable, and it's basically Sweden is slowly going toward the cliff.
The ruling leadership in Stockholm and those who have set the moral tone in this country via the cultural dialogue in the media truly have Stockholm syndrome. They are captive to their own virtues, what they believe is a virtue, and with good intentions, they are truly paving the way to hell for the Swedish people. It's on the expense of the not only well-being of the Swedish people, but our very survival. If you are Swedish, you are part of a global minority. You cannot have any interest that concerns what is good for you, or your nation, or your people, much less your existence, or God forbid, your preservation. Right now, they are replacing the population in Sweden. The United Nations have released a report from year 2000 where they argue that the people in the European countries, with inclusion of Russia, United States, and Japan, needs to have their population replaced. They are doing this by incentivizing immigrants to come to Sweden and other Western countries and have children. Meanwhile, the native populations in these countries are not only taught that we are the root of all problems in the world, we have been hammered with environmentalism for years, doing our part, the carbon footprints, we are overpopulated, psychologically pre-programming people with the desire not to procreate. On top of this, in Sweden, for example, we have the gender war and state feminism, widening the chasms between men and women. Perhaps this is one of the reasons why we're seeing a decline in Swedish births and an increase in immigrant births. If this continues on the path it's on, Sweden will be a non-existent population in just a few generations from now. So if you believe in diversity and preservation of people and multiple cultures on the globe instead of globalism and monoculture, a mishmash of nothing within non-existent national borders and no self-determination, then you should start advocating for control of immigration into Sweden and other European countries that suffer from the same policies. For Red Ice Creations, I'm Henrik in Sweden. Thank you for listening.
som ung politiker och har precis kommit in i det här, så tycker jag att jag måste ge ärliga svar. Jag måste ge en tydlig signal till svenska folket att tro inte på bidrag i framtiden, tro inte på politikerna.